and welcome to another edition of Trader Talk TV. Today we've got Jochen from Adform in the office. Jochen, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Today we're talking about the ID landscape in a post-cookie world, and Jochen's going to run through sort of what the current landscape looks like and what Adform are doing in sort of preparation for this post-cookie world. But before we do that, and before I have the opportunity to butcher Jochen's name again, because I have a reputation for doing it, could you introduce yourself, Jochen, and say what you do at Adform, and just give a little bit of an overview of Adform as well, please?
All right, happy to do that. So my name is pronounced Jochen, which almost no one gets right, so it's completely fine. I've heard probably 100 variations of it, and I listen to all of them, so you don't have to worry. I'm CTO at Adform, owning all around the product portfolio and the technology portfolio, trying to build one of the best DSPs in the world, while also catering for ad serving and for data management and audiences, the stuff that you have to do as an ad tech platform, which sits in the middle. I've been doing that for 8 years, and as I already said when we spoke earlier, ad tech's still an exciking journey because stuff is changing.
It's fun. It's fun. And it's Jochen, viewers, Jochen, not Jochen. Jesus, I'm never going to write. Anyway, Jochen, let's talk about the current landscape, because I mean, people have heard about, deprecation of cookies before. Like visually, what does that mean? What does that mean for the industry right now? Because we've relied on third-party cookies for most of ID matching across the open web and other channels. But what does that actually mean for the industry about deprecation?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I think many people have talked about that or shown that. Actually, my first presentation ever was about cookies, cookie matching, and fingerprinting in 2012.
Wow.
So I could probably find some slides there, but I'll try to do it ad hoc because that's our task here.
Yeah.
The main thing that a DSP has to do is it sits in the middle, right? You can also say DSP, SSP, the programmatic stack, and it connects the inventory from the publishers, P1. I'm a computer scientist, so you might see some N and N+1s and J's later.
That's fine.
To PN, and make that available to, let's just say, a buyer. Let's just say one buyer. So we have one buyer, the advertiser, the agency, whomever. The challenge that we have is to solve the use case of that advertiser, and he wants to create reach and frequency or reach people again that have visited his or her website, right? So the question is how you do that, and in order to do that, you would need to know that a consumer that has visited that site, so we have that consumer, which has an ID, let's say 4711, visits that site, and it's the very same consumer with that ID 4711. How do you do that if those sites can't speak to each other? The good thing in the past was they can, because here you could deploy this beautiful mechanism of cookie matching, trying to write somewhat nicely, which was also matching back with the publisher side. So here's also a process of cookie matching. This created this unified ID of 4711 because those sites were constantly talking to each other. Hey, I haven't seen that user, so I'll match with all the partners. Hey, there's a player visiting here, so I'll call my DSP in order to perform the matching with all the SSPs. So if you sell an ad, there's probably 15, 20, 30 match calls happening constantly in the background, and that's what privacy-wise often is considered broadcasting of IDs, because basically you inform the entire ecosystem, hundreds of players, constantly around those IDs. And that is, for good reasons, now under pressure. So this central ID, 4711, for you visiting a certain website and then visiting all the publishers P1 to PN, has vanished or will vanish. It actually has vanished already on 60% of the traffic.
Exactly, because of the part of Chrome traffic is not available anymore because of the privacy piece. Safari is not available, Firefox is not available. So we are in a world where really 40% of the open web is addressable via third-party cookies, right?
Roughly.
So how does this sort of affect the ecosystem as a whole? Because we have an over-reliance on it. So I mean, what's the immediate sort of impact for a buyer and a seller?
So I think the immediate impact is pretty obvious. Let's assume this here, I'll just go like this if we find the sponge. I think that's the English word, right?
Yeah.
We find the sponge. We could do that later also a bit more beautiful. The challenge is that this 47 goes away and it becomes here a 47A, a 47P1, and a 4711.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. PN. So everyone speaks a different identity language.
Right.
If you then, as an advertiser, want to do reach and frequency, where you say, hey, dear DSP, do me a favor, the users in my target audience, I want to reach them around 7 to 10 times. I don't want to annoy them, but I want to repeat my message a couple of times. Well, you would talk 7 to 10 times here. You would talk 7 to 10 times here. And in total, you would do that up to n times, let's say 7 times. So you have 7n. If you have 20 publishers, you have 140 contacts for that one user, which is a media wastage of roughly 99%, I would say. A little bit less, to be honest. But you're basically throwing your money out of the window if you cannot control the exposure of ads using a centralized ID.
Okay.
Which is not good.
Yeah. So obviously this breaks the entire system. Like, I mean, we can't function the way we used to in terms of like cookie matching and ID matching without a third-party cookie. And given the fact that Google is going all in on the last 40%, and let's be honest, most of the industry has been over-indexing on that 40% that's available. So
absolutely,
you guys have been building like your sort of post-cookie solution for many, many years. You've been forced out of the traps in this, and you've built one in Europe, particularly in Europe, because there's seriously tight and draconian sort of privacy laws. So I want to talk about how you're doing this, particularly without use of cookie. How is it possible? And just give us sort of an overview of how it all works.
All right. So what needs to happen on the respective advertiser and publisher sides is, of course, collecting consent still, right? Because that is fundamental, that's paramount. If that doesn't happen, it doesn't work. So we have this foundational layer of our consumers. All the consumers
have to consent.
And they have to interact with the respective publishers, of course, right? So with all of them. So, and now the question is, in the past, this publisher just said, I want to use the Adform ID, which I cookie match with all the other IDs out there. Well, but we are a third-party system, so our third-party ID cannot be built anymore on this publisher side. So that's where it breaks. And the question is now, how do you solve that? At the end, everyone takes a bit their own decision, and that's where all those ID vendors come in, or first-party IDs, so to say. And publisher one uses the pub common ID and creates an ID for that very user. Let's just say that's the pub common 1. This publisher uses the ID5 ID, and this is then the ID5 1 for user 1. So we basically are starting, there might be the publisher I here, which also uses ID5, right? And maybe it's partially probabilistic, partially deterministic. That's the same ID, so let's assume it's the same ID here. So, but what you can see immediately, the same user still has many, many different IDs. And the problem of exposure capping, of frequency controls, still persists. So what a DSP must do, it must add a layer that is capable of accepting all those different IDs in the bid request. The system it hits with, let's say in Europe, with roughly, depends on time of day and also how much you demand. You have 3 to 4 million queries per second. Let me write that nicer. And every single query has different ID vendors in there. And you know which ID vendor it is, you know which ID it is, you know a lot about the IDs, but basically you can't cap. So what you need to create is a unifying solution. And that's what we started to build in 2018-19, because there are many challenges connected to it. Challenge 1, to build this unifying layer that again says this pub common ID 1 is for the same user as this ID5 ID1 and as this ID1. So we are building kind of in this sense this merging layer where we bind everything back together. We do it on platform, so we don't share that with anyone. It is just on Adform for Adform, and we don't share it back with the rest of the industry. So this is not an ID solution which we share. It's an ID solution that we only deploy for the purpose of the advertisers that we have and the publishers that are working with us, with our SSP or with other SSPs. That doesn't matter. The beauty of it is it's completely compliant. You don't need any other vendor. You don't need cookie matching. And of course, we're using business rules, deterministic signals, AI signals, classic machine learning, some sophisticated stuff. And we benefit from the fact that we are a large platform, plus we also have ad serving in place, which gives us lots of course, consented signals that we can use in order to build this unifying layer. So what that does today, and that's the big challenge in building it. So I think there are a couple of hundred, I think there are 400 IDs.
400?
In the bid stream.
Right.
Different vendors or individual solutions that you can see. You're just talking euro or a certain fraction of it. There's actually more. Retail media, everyone has their own ID again, right? So there are a couple of hundred IDs. And then sometimes people approach us and say, hey, I have an ID, I want a cap on it, how can I do that? Making this configurable and scalable is, you call me, you say I have an ID, it's for your client XYZ, I want to activate it. We call the team activates it 1 day later, you add it as 41st ID in the ID Fusion graph. So this is super flexible, it is super scalable, because we need to be able, against 3-4 million queries per second, to not just read one profile, our old cookie profile, which was matched here, but we need to be able to somehow work with 40 profiles at the same time.
Wow.
So it's an engineering challenge that is pretty massive in order to just scale up like this. I could work with 80 IDs tomorrow if I want to. And this is why building the system took 3-4 years. And we pre-invested because back then you had kind of 2% first-party ID coverage.
Right.
Today, you know the number? Chrome traffic, 70% of the impressions we buy on Chrome, on third-party IDs, already have a first-party ID connected.
Right.
We already buy more than 50% of the traffic on one of those 40 first-party IDs that we have in the system. So the majority of Adform is either already on first-party IDs, those 40, or is on traffic that is still activated on the strong third-party ID. It's not yet gone, so why shouldn't we use it? But we could immediately flip also to the first-party ID that comes in the very same bid request. So basically, you could say, that's my view, turn the cookie off. The old cookie, it can go now because this system is ready for 2027.
Couple of questions around this. Does this work on the likes of Safari and Firefox as well? I mean, because like they've been sort of almost neglected, I say channels, but neglected sort of areas. Even though like Safari users are probably the most affluent users in the world in terms of spend. So does that work? Because like that's been a huge issue for a lot of like, I mean, if you look at the yield from a publisher's perspective, Safari traffic is way down compared to Chrome traffic.
Absolutely.
So like, could you talk a little bit about that?
So that is actually the original business case where we convinced the commercial team in Adform to go out with it, that we're saying, you are trying to reach your audience in 40% of the traffic, because Safari has been dead addressability-wise for ages. So, but in Safari, you always had first-party IDs. Not at scale, it used to be 5, 10%. Now we're at, I think, 68% of the traffic in Safari as first-party IDs. So we're making the formerly non-addressable part of Safari addressable with that solution. And that's also when you look at the use cases that we published in the last years, I think we have 40, 50 use cases, you see insane numbers on CTR drops, CPM drops. And the reason is, of course, not because we are finding much cheaper users per se, it's the same users or even more affluent users, as you say, but there's no competition because people are not bidding there because they can't make it addressable. So we find super valuable users, user traffic in Safari, and can bid on it for very good prices because the bid pressure is much lower.
That's pretty strong USP, like for you guys, like to be able to bid across those sort of like barren sort of landscapes effectively. What about the likes of Privacy Sandbox? Does that affect you guys at all? I mean, does that change the narrative? I mean, did you like when you built this? You really weren't thinking, oh, Google's going to come up with a Privacy Sandbox and that's going to help things. You almost built that independent of that. So does this is not really affected by the Privacy Sandbox change?
Well, the story is even the other way around. So I have to pitch to my board. And they ask, what about the Privacy Sandbox? They're PEs, they don't know that much about advertising, but of course they know about the Privacy Sandbox.
Everybody knows about Privacy Sandbox.
Everybody knows about the Privacy Sandbox. You read bedtime stories to your kids in the evening about Privacy Sandbox.
High-level overview, not the actual sort of like meat and the sausage.
But it's also extremely complicated. It's really fair enough. So of course I have to go to the board and say, they ask me, when do you build the Privacy Sandbox? And I say, well, first we have to build the business case because it's a multi-thousand day investment. It is capable of doing retargeting. It is capable of doing a couple of use cases. Then you can argue how much of the IAB Tech Lab, let's say, the kill switch is true compared to what Google has replied. But let's assume it can't do everything. Actually, it can't do a lot of, in my perspective. But that doesn't matter. So I basically have a hedge because I say, let's see what it can really do. Because we can already do all the use cases with ID Fusion. If the sandbox can do it better, let's find out step by step.
Yeah,
But
it's
we
still,
will not drop off a cliff.
Exactly, but Privacy Sandbox is only for Chrome, and you pointed out that now you're able to identify traffic across Safari, which is I think around 30% of, or maybe 40% of the European sort of browser market because of
exactly. It's market by market. It's very different.
But this is built for Europe. I know it's global, but like this was built for European case. Like the stringent laws in this continent, like are way ahead of America, which doesn't even have a federal law. It's all done at sort of the state level, which is problematic in itself. But talk about the scalability. I mean, this is going to be it's a global thing. You can actually apply this to
that works. That works everywhere, right? And the only hedge that I can't prove at full scale is because we don't end up with just one advertiser.
Yeah.
But of course with
multiple.
Let's say M this time around.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot. So I can already see that 20% of my retargeting is done with ID Fusion. Then I would need to explain to my investors, what about the 80%? Are they at risk? I say, I don't think so. And we look into the numbers and it seems to be very solid that it's not. The challenge is getting ready for first-party world.
Right.
In order to contribute to this, you need to sign different privacy agreements. You need to sign a joint controller agreement. Only 20% of the clients have signed a joint controller agreement and have already set up server-to-server site tracking, right? So that you can actually deploy. First-party IDs. So the clients that do that already do things like retargeting also with ID Fusion. The clients that not, I don't have the proof point, but I'm pretty sure that that also works. And that is why we are very relaxed around waiting about the actual capability, benefits, and timings of the sandbox, because I have absolutely no pressure to be a first or second mover. We only go there when the business case is solid, and it would be a very heavy investment. But if retargeting all goes in Chrome into the sandbox, of course we will build it, but for reach and frequency, for retargeting in Safari, of course not, but even retargeting in Chrome, and a lot of the use cases around audience targeting that don't work anyway, lookalikes, we will use the first-party cookie ecosystem. And that sounds pretty neat and solid, so I'm happy when the cookie finally has gone away.
Good. One last question.
Yeah.
Open web, sure, but other channels would be interesting as well, like the CTV. Does it have the same application in those channels as well, or is there sort of more to be done?
It all depends on the CTV publisher, right? If the CTV publisher injects a high-quality first-party ID, it works. Many inject an ID. Quality of IDs on CTV is a bit lower. It's a mobile environment in that sense, so you have mates, but you can do that as well. CTV is a bit IP focused, so many people use IPs for targeting, more household-level targeting. That slots in also very nice and neatly. It's a configurable system, but CTV is not yet on that level of maturity where you see the same adoption, the same vendors. It's a bit more case by case, and some don't stand anything, and then you need to go back to IP. But I think it will converge at some point.
Yeah. So you're pretty confident about the post-cookie world, like, and then you've built this out for the better part of like 6 years, like, so you're seeing your clients who use the Adform solution, the Adform ID Fusion solution, that they're able to buy, they can target, they can do frequency capping, the capabilities are there to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely there. We have high double digits of our traffic on ID Fusion already. Big parts of our revenue as well are then on ID Fusion traffic, so we are super happy and confident about that. And I think the sandbox can be a tool in the toolbox for many, but most importantly, I think the advertisers and the publishers, they should not let go of that layer. Because if the sandbox comes in, this will all go away. Then you have here the sandbox, and you're allowed to talk to the sandbox. You're not allowed to talk to the consumer anymore. And that brings a couple of other downsides. Why advertisers and publishers really need to push hard, really get those server-to-server first-party installations in place, because otherwise they get into a huge dependency
on Google,
on the large platforms.
Well, on that note, Jochen, thank you very much for your time. Thanks for running through that. Interesting to see you guys building for this even before it blew up. But
it was a big discussion on the board.
And we'll definitely have you in again, particularly if this becomes a piece. But I think you summed it up well. I think even if Sandbox does appear, you're still going to have channels or areas like Safari and Firefox and even Microsoft that won't be in the Sandbox. So thanks again for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And that was Trailer Talk TV, and we will see you next time.